Splice it later.
This way so she gets a better view. Can you see everyone okay? Yes, let's see. I think I can see all of you. She may not be able to see me so well. That's okay. So yeah, life is about to get chaotic for all of you next week, I imagine.
Mostly.
Just
no.
him? Mostly him?
We have, our big, I only have the 4th of July to worry about. The 4th of July and drones. That'll be all I'll worry about.
And drones?
Oh, yeah. See how many idiots show up with those things and
Even
deal
the fly
with
zone,
that.
right?
Huh?
Is it all of Arlington that fly?
It is for the FAA, it is a no-fly zone for national airspace, other than, with those that have the clearances for that, but the toy drones, the things that they fly below 400 feet and don't fall under the national airspace system.
That's right.
And so, then it gets into this whole thing about what are you doing with the drones? Our concern generally isn't about the drone itself. Most of the people that fly those things, they're pretty small. I'm not worried about payload or any other nonsense. It's more a matter of what are you doing with it?
That's right.
What
Are
are you trying to
being
say?
a terrorist? Are you a peeping Tom? I mean, because that would make it very easy to.
They had a conversation over at Park Police Headquarters last week about that in the Capital Region, and I'm going to go in sometime next month, sit on an all-day thing with the National Institutes of Justice as they're trying to define that, both from people flying drones, but then public, the ability for law enforcement to utilize the tool and the restrictions for us.
They should.
I think I'm going to that too. It's interesting though, if drones, or I don't call them drones because it's got such a negative connotation. I like using UAVs or whatever.
Yeah.
But you're gonna need UAVs to defeat the UAV threat, in my opinion. Number one, to identify them, and number two, to possibly interdict with them.
Well, yeah, I mean, so somebody brought up to me about it. They showed a UAV that had a net system that was designed to take down another UAV. I'm like, this is what I need, is air wars over the Iwo Jima on the 4th of July.
What's going to be interesting is as that technology becomes more advanced, how it's going to be used to steal data information that's uploaded. All you have to do is be in the an approximated area to be able to like link in and
Right.
upload. So when we talk about cybersecurity, I'm just waiting for that.
I was thrilled to know that all the information I provide to the Department of Defense as part of my top secret clearance was compromised through our great federal system of security. That was OPMs. Almost all the DoD top secret clearances and all the paperwork that goes along with that was subject to that security breach.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm going to put a credit freeze on my.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to do that. I've got a really good service I've been monitoring for a couple of years, but I think I'll just do a 3-year credit freeze just to make it a little bit tighter. The headache with that is, once you do that,
It's really hard to.
then you got to go through that 10-digit code to, if you want to buy a car, or you want to do something else, you've got to open it for that period of time.
Well, can't you just have it monitored for 3 years instead of freezing
Well,
it?
OPM gave me, in this latest round, I've already been doing it before this, but OPM gave me at the end of the day to hook up, that they're paying for the next 2 years. It's a
That's
pretty
nice.
comprehensive check. The thing is, though, if you do most of those, so he decides to go down, he has my information, he tries to open an account, I have to then, as soon as I see it, say that's a fraudulent account, and then close it. The difference with a credit freeze is there's no hope of opening anything.
That's right, because
Including
then you
me.
have to go through.
You've got to have that 10-digit security code,
Yeah.
and that's the only way the top 3 will give you any information. So Equifax, Transperian, I
Right.
can't remember the other one. But once you put that freeze on, it's pretty much like there's no way you're opening a credit card, a credit account, you can't do anything. Now, it doesn't impact your credit score, it doesn't impact your current existing credit cards, doesn't do any of that. it's to try to establish anything new.
Right. So if something unexpected in your life happens, that could be really complicated if you have to move or sell a house or buy a
So
house.
then you'd probably have to pay to shut it off for a while,
Right.
because you're gonna have too much.
You probably have to just get, and have an attorney involved to
But-
validate who
But
you
the one
are.
OPM gave me, CIS or CI something, whatever it is, it monitors not just credit, it looks at any inquiries on your social security number, any inquiries on a number of things, so
Right.
we'll see.
We'll give it just a minute. I know we have one more person coming, so we'll just give it another minute. Interesting story about my sister-in-law's husband. He is J. Oliver Nichols the 13th. So in his family, they alternate the middle name. So his son is James, I don't even know, Nichols the 14th or something. Well, his dad and he have, the same name. Well, they grounded him one time. No, his grandfather and he have the same name. Anyways, he was trying to fly back one time and got detained because it kept popping up as his grandfather. And so he's like, my grandfather is dead. Clearly, I am not 80 years old, And so then he got put on a no-fly list because he got a little rough with them. And all because of just a simple mistaken identity in his grandfather's name. Because what number you are wasn't being used consistently.
I have a twin brother,
Do you?
His name-
Identical?
you would think.
Okay, my sisters are identical
But
twins.
he's Jeff Thomas Harden. I'm Jack Thomas Harden. Same date of birth, of course.
Mhm.
Our social security numbers are only off by 2 digits.
Right.
So the
Painful.
credit people screw that up all the time. Last time I went to buy a house, I got zinged because he makes a lot more money than me, of course, but he owned like 3 homes, just bought a house and furnished it. So now I'm trying to buy a house and they're looking at how much money I make and they're saying, you can't afford this. Go away. So I had to go in there and everything that wasn't me, and write a letter.
Validate
This is
it.
not me, this is not me, this is not me, this is not me. And,
How long did that take you for them to actually process it?
Not long.
Oh,
I
that's
mean,
good.
Less than a week. I
That's
mean,
good.
But I know that it's something that I'm gonna have to continue to do. I haven't done it in the past, 10 years or so. I think I bought my son a car last year, and I think my credit score was like 815. So I have a good credit score.
Mhm.
But I know I'm gonna have to go back and do it again sooner or later
Yeah.
to get him off
You
of.
should thank your parents for that.
Yeah.
Here's a good one for you. I'm sitting about maybe 4 years ago now. I get mail at my house. My wife's name is Sandra Miller Farr. She kept her middle name, right? So SM Farr. I get a letter addressed to SM Farr, but a different address. But within half a mile from where I live, and I'm thinking, and of course I'm always thinking negative, so I'm thinking, who would have the SM Farr but use a different address? Or does somebody ever get into my account somewhere and they're getting mail set up separate? So long story short, I decided to go up and see if there's anybody at this address. And I go up there, and there is an SM Farr, but it's Sandra Michelle Farr. And what blows me away is I come to find out, I talked to her for a little while, and after connecting a series of different dots, I come to find out that her husband is my father's brother's son. And my parents were divorced when I was 2, so I hardly know anybody on that side of that family.
That's crazy.
That's crazy, man. I started talking to someone up there and I said, so you have a neighbor who's, like I said, my father's brother's son, but he was born later, so he's a little bit younger than me. I'm like, that's nuts.
Did you stay in touch?
Oh yeah, you stay in touch. I mean, I see him mostly through Facebook and that kind of stuff. But it was just sort of funny to have that sort of happen because I got connected back because my sister. You're familiar with Lou Gehrig's disease, right?
Mhm.
Before Lou Gehrig's disease in Vermont, it's in the National New England Journal of Medicine. There was a thing referred to as the Farr's disease. It is a very similar strain that took place in New England. Our family's from, I can trace it back to like 1408 in Berkshire, England, and they come over there, and then there's a split in the family. So there's the Farr's that had this Farr's disease, which my sister immediately heard that and gets all spun up and like funny. you're already 60, your kids are 32. I think if something was going to happen, you probably would have had some sense, but she's a disaster type. And then she starts doing the research, and the other half of the FARs that left apparently went out, in the Mormon faith out in the west in Utah. It was just bizarre. So my sister knew this Sandra Michelle, but no connection between the two until we happened to get that letter.
That sounds like something in the South,
How far apart? Do you know?
where your family
Age?
tree
No,
branch
no,
is
no. Well,
not
you remember
removed
how
at
far
all.
apart you are living?
My sister, oh,
No, no, no.
is the
Less
one
than
we found,
four.
oh, half a mile.
Half a mile down the road?
Yeah.
That's-
No, no, in Ashland. You live in
I
Ashland?
live in Ashburn, yeah. Broadland, but yeah, same place.
Okay, I didn't realize you lived that far out.
I think they make the chief live in the county that he's the chief at,
No,
For quality
shows
of life
lack
and
of
mental
dedication on your
health
part.
reasons,
no,
I would say.
listen, I'll
I'd
point
agree
out
with
that,
you.
that I know
Sometimes you don't wanna
nothing.
live where you work.
That was part of my, I know
You live in Falls
nothing about
Church?
the county I live in. I sleep there.
It'd
That's
be like you
essentially it.
never leave work,
I
right?
spend my entire life in this county. You wanna know what's going on? Politics,
That's right.
everything.
That's
You
more
ask me, I can
important
tell
is
you.
to have
Ask
some
me about
money,
Loudon, I
right?
couldn't tell you shit.
Like
The
my
only idea
friends
is
from
sleep, yeah.
Alexandria, they're selling their home and
If I-
just
if
put
I
a bid
come
on a
from
home
outside,
for
that's
$796,000 and I just,
If I had come from
That would get you a
outside,
trailer in.
that would have been a requirement.
really? Crap.
Yeah.
So I said, I mean, I know y'all do well, but they go, no, we'll be living on ramen noodles. So they came out to
I
visit
told
us
them
and we
if I
took them.
could move,
And we
Sure,
spent
before
250 on our
leaving, I would
big
move.
town
If I was
home. I
gonna make any
mean,
move,
granted,
it'd be
I'm
in
lucky,
county,
I don't have
make
to
sure
come in
that I
every
got
day.
everything.
They're like, this is $1 million home, blah, blah, blah. I'm like,
This
well,
county is way more
Location,
expensive.
location, location.
put a ding in the wall, I don't care, I can fix it. I'm like, I like having a little separate identity from where I work.
like
Because I didn't have that in
being
Mississippi.
out, it's harder to do.
Yeah, I lived 1 mile, less than a mile from where I worked.
You work one place, you live another, you don't have to worry
And
about.
everyone knew
running it.
everyone's business and
When
then
I was,
some.
I was
And
in
it's just,
narcotics
it's
for
great
9
because
years.
you have a sense of communal
I
identity,
never
but
ran
at the
into
same time, it's a
people
little too
that-
close.
You had lock up,
Yeah,
Right.
you
but
need to
my
find
twin
that
brother
balance.
has,
You do,
Oh,
so.
that's
and they
good.
think he's me, you know, so.
Yes, he will.
you
Well, I
know,
guess, should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, I guess so. Keep it moving. Tap the foot.
Here we go. All right. Let me check with her really quick.
Who's on the camera?
So, it's Rosalind, right? Yeah, Rosalind's on the computer, and Nita couldn't make it today, right? So that's why we're recording for both her and Trevor, I think, couldn't make it today. So, we're gonna start on the slides, and I'll try and keep you up to date on slides. Would you prefer to face the group or face the PowerPoint? Great, okay. Well, I will scoot you back so you can kind of see everyone, and I'll try and, I gotta hit the mouse so you may not see me as much, okay? Just holler if you need anything, okay? Great. All right, so, got a little agenda to go through today. Did that. Attendance sheet. Also, I updated the syllabus just to let everyone know that you did have 2 weeks to also complete the templates, just because since we made them associated with the synopsis and they were due 2 weeks after the last session today. And you know, we give and take. 2 weeks is a good time, but if you need longer, just email me. So I did extend that as well. So I updated that and sent that to everyone. Any questions on that?
You said that can be handwritten in, right?
If you're more comfortable handwriting into the template I provided you, just make it legible as much as possible. If you're not as savvy with the computer, that's
Well,
absolutely
it's not
fine.
that. I printed off the ones that you sent out initially and used those to do some of them
Not a problem.
already.
Those are absolutely fine.
The ones they did?
I just wanted to provide you ones that you could actually go in and move around if you didn't already have. I know in your case, you already had some that were associated with projects that you were writing the synopsis for, right?
Right.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Bless you.
Bless
Thank you.
Any other questions on the homework? So today, there's 3 items remaining. There's the quiz, there's the synopsis, and then there's the templates, okay? Again, the synopsis templates go together. I just handed you out the quiz. I'm just gonna make it, I've carved out some time for everyone to take it today if you wanna go ahead and handwrite it and just get done with it. But if you prefer to wait and submit it with your other materials, 2 weeks again, okay? We'll go through a quick presentation this morning, then we'll have the quiz, then we'll have lunch, and then this afternoon we can focus on more of a general open free flow discussion of the articles. Does that sound good? Questions? And I'll go ahead and hand out the evaluations so that way when we do wrap up, we can do that as well. Okay? There you go, sir. Oh, thank you. And Rosalind, I'll just have you and everyone else that's not here to do the evaluations in person next time. Does that sound good?
Okay, and I need to do one for project.
The last module? Okay, I'll bring a copy for that one as well.
Okay.
All right. So in terms of the updated templates, did everyone understand, was okay with the changes? I know those are mostly used for your files if you didn't want to use them. I know you said you had already started hand filling out the others, but I wanted you to be able to have a versatile, usable template. So that's why I made sure that they were all either in open PowerPoint or in Word documents. So if you do want to use those in the future, at least you have a workable format to get started with. Any questions on those templates? Great. Right. So, as a refresher, can anyone tell me what this is? This is the definition that we came up with last time in terms of what project management means to us as a group, as a cohort for the Certified Public Manager program. After discussing everything in the last session and some time to reflect over the last 2 weeks, is this still the case? Is there something, or there critical elements missing to our definition, our working definition, let's call it that. So a project is an activity undertaken by a stakeholder or stakeholders within a defined period of time in a specific scope to achieve a desired outcome utilizing a defined set of resources.
I still think that's a pretty comprehensive.
I think it's
You
an
could-
excellent one,
You can
actually.
plug different things in. If you're talking about resources, it could be personnel resources, it could be specialties, it could be budget, but because it says define resources,
That's right.
it covers a lot of those.
It is. It's open to most anything. Well, this pen doesn't work. Excuse me. I should probably replace the little thing in it. I have one that looks just like it. So, the reason why I bring the group definition back up, also in part, is even though we're going to talk about the journal articles in a little more depth later this afternoon, you all got to experience how the writers or the lit review, and them conducting the lit review, how they're defining project, maybe project management, right? So, again, what Jay was saying is the fact that this is a pretty solid answer, and I have to agree with him because when reading through these articles, as you probably noticed as well, they don't do a very good job of defining it. In fact, it's almost like trying to define terrorism or genocide. There's no concrete definition. People keep going back and forth on it and putting their own signature on the definition, but it's still extremely vague. At least this, we put parameters around it, and with the set of resources language, we've opened that up to more ambiguous meaning because like Jay said, resources can mean human capital, it can mean infrastructure, it can mean pure budget, it can mean, collaborations and partnerships, okay? So when you think of resources, it's the totality of all things that could potentially have an impact on that project. Any other questions about this? I just wanted a quick refresher so we can jump right back in. Okay? All right. So, in project management presentations in the wide world, they'd love to use visual aids. I'm not so big on visual aids, so they like to do that to reinforce kind of the principles, the commandments, the pillars. As I'm sure you've read one of the questions on your quiz, the triple constraint. So it's the same information, they're just hashing it in a different way to kind of, muscle memory. In this case, the 4 commandments are, project. Well, a project should be what? Well, first of all, it should be well written, because if it's not well written, you're not actually articulating what the goals are, the objectives are. It should be well defined, okay? What that means is that, okay, well, you have these goals and these objectives, but are they translatable? Can you actually, is there some synergy from one to the other? Does it lead to a larger kind of mission for the project? So think about your organizations and how, your working documents are for them. You usually have a mission and it's at the apex, correct? Then you have some set of goals, all right, to meet that mission. Well, then you have the objectives that meet the goals that meet the mission. So when they're talking about being well-defined, same principle applies for project management, okay? So when you write a project synopsis or proposal for research or for funding for, overtime or for equipment, think about it that way also, okay? They like it, what we call this, and I'll just do this right here. Really good marker around here. I'm assuming people use this for, that would be bad. I'll do it right here. Okay, have any of you heard of the flying V?
What?
I have.
The flying V.
I have, but I can't remember. It's been a
Okay.
long time.
And I'll take a picture of this and send it to you, Rosalind. The flying V. When you're talking about just about anything, whether it's a paper that you write in class, whether it's a project that you're trying to develop, whether it's a proposal, anything. This is called the flying V. And there's a very, very good reason why. This is most commonly known in the UN Security Council, but it can be applied just about to all writing styles. Okay, the flying V is you're going to start out very broad, right? So that most missions that we know of, they're pretty broad, right? I mean, they're the overarching identity of your organization or your project. Well, as you move down, like what we were talking about, so M's for mission, we start talking about the goals, right? And that's where you're trying to mix in between specifics and the broad measures. Down here is where you get very specific, okay? And as we know, your objectives are what's very specific, your objectives and your subtasks in order to meet those objectives. So when you think of project management, think of it in a flying V nature, okay? Let me grab my camera. I'll just use my camera if it hasn't been stolen out of my bag. But whenever you do just about anything, that's how most people, when you're talking about essay style, well, then you have a concluding paragraph, but usually it starts out pretty broad with your thesis statement, and then you move forward through the body, and you're getting to the point at the very end. Okay, the so what? And then you wrap everything back up. Another way to look at this is, who's heard of, okay, there's a way to also pitch messaging when you're talking about project management. You're going to tell them, okay? That's the very high level. You're going to tell them what you told them. Okay, that's where you're getting a little more specific. Tell them what you. Oh, no, I'm
That's the
sorry.
last
Tell
one.
them what you're going to tell them. Sorry.
And then tell them what you told them.
That's right. Okay. And then tell them what you told them. I cannot spell today. Okay? This is the same principle, okay? You're very broad and vague up here. You're going to tell them what you're going to tell them. Okay, so you're breaking it down into more manageable pieces, sort of like goals and objectives. And then you're going to tell them what you told them, meaning you're getting very specific. That's where your tasks meet your objectives, okay? you don't see a lot of that language in project management. That's more of organizational behavior, but some public admin scholars marry the two. Okay, that's probably why you never see it, because much like what Nita was saying last time, project management literature is centered on two things: construction and engineering projects, right? You very rarely see it, and you even saw it in some of these articles about how, the literature is just not there because it's more qualitatively measured. When you're talking about engineering and construction projects, you have something real and tangible to measure at the end. So it's just easier for people to grasp those types of concepts. Okay, so, and I'll send you a picture of that as well. Can you hear us okay, Rosalind?
Yes, I can, but can I make a request?
Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know what slide you want to take.
Yes, we are on slide 3. Sorry about that. Yes, I'll try and do a better job. We are just about to move into slide 4. Okay? Okay. So project scope. When you're talking about scoping efforts, we discussed this last session, but again, like I said, a lot of the literature and a lot of presentations tend to repeat themselves. So this is just more of to hammer it into your mindset, which I'm sure all of you already know. Hello. Here, I'll get you what you need, and we'll catch you up, don't worry. No problem. Okay, so scoping efforts. So you want to aim to set that project baseline for cost and schedule. Those are probably two of the most critical pieces, okay? How much is this going to cost you, and what's your time frame? How quickly? Is there a sense of urgency? Or do you have more flexibility, like a 7-year project that we were discussing last session? All right, the right mix of people. If you get the wrong team together, I'm not saying that it has to be perfect, but if you don't have the right players with the right competencies, what's going to happen to your project? You may have internal miscommunication, you may have internal fighting, you may have people communicating to the outside world that shouldn't be, the outside stakeholders or clients. So communication is a huge problem. Must include implementation measures. Well, that's a given. Identify items not included. All right, I think Bonnie probably touched upon this to a degree in the program evaluation. When we're talking about those external factors that may send pressures on your project that you may not know exist until you get underway. So there may be a political, policy issue that pops up, or there may be competitive funding. What if you have a competing project? Maximum influence on project cost. Also, again, breaking it down into manageable pieces, going back to the flying V from starting out very broad and going to very specific. All right, what do you think as a group, what's missing from these scoping efforts? Again, this is just kind of an overview. It's not all inclusive, but it's certainly not limited to, So when you're talking about scoping, when you're just thinking that think of this as the pure idea stage, where you don't even know if there's funding, you don't know if anyone's interested, but you have an interest. So think about what are the parameters to complete this project or this idea you have in your mind. What are the critical pieces to consider? So we've covered personnel, we've covered costs, we've covered, okay, what are the major activities that are going to happen within this? What are potential constraints or limitations? External, factors. What are we missing?
Well, it doesn't say up there. I was going to say stakeholder analysis. I mean, you can have the right people, etc. But I'm not sure when you talk about involving the right people, it's the right people to implement the project. But there's also a stakeholder analysis. I know the one that kills us all over and over again is they come up with we have a project, but I don't have professional project management people on my staff. Mm-hmm. And so they're generally way the hell off on the actual cost of what something's going to cost.
That's right.
The county wants to know up front what's it going to cost. Well, I don't have a clue because I haven't hired a consultant yet to go through this, but they still want a cost.
That's right.
That one gets us most of the time. And then a lot of it is the ability to have someone that can really do that needs analysis.
Mhm.
every deliverable that you
The
need to
so
get.
what?
Right.
So what if you do this project? What is the outcome? What is the output that you're gonna get, right? And we talked about that, and I'm sure, again, Bonnie talked about that, the difference between output and outcome, short-term, long-term, what's quantifiable, what's more qualitative. But going back to, the budget situation, it's easier to get buy-in sometimes, it's harder to find the money. Because there's, a million great ideas, but there's not a lot of resources out there in the world.
Right.
So how do you match up that need, your intellectual merit of your need, with the allocation of resources? Okay, so this is what you want to do. All right, great and all. But how are you going to do it within these means, or maybe very little at all, if any? All right, so your budget question, that's a recurring problem throughout all sectors of society, employment. So public, private, nonprofit, non-governmental, you name it. The reason is you touched on it, and we talked about this a little bit last time, is a lot of times people who are formulating the budget for specific projects are pure budget people. They're not project people, they're not research people, they're not even in your own organization. You are simply sending them ideas, and they're trying to draft. If you don't have someone on your project team that understands what it is that you're trying to do and all the needs you're going to have, like personnel, like travel, what are some of the other line items we discussed, like equipment, maybe infrastructure or construction cost, maybe personnel, we talked about that being a huge one if it's not a construction project. So if you don't have someone that understands the need for each of those line items that's involved in your project, and then it's going to cause for problems, especially in terms of budget pressures. Most people, budgeting is a very finicky field. It's very dry. It's like accounting. I'm going to say it. There's no accountants in here really, but it's boring as hell, right? But if you're someone that has that skill set.
An accountant doesn't feel that way. What are you talking about?
No, not accountant, but a budget person probably feels that way. It's accounting, especially around tax season, I'm sure is high pressure, high stakes, lots of money. I'm sure it gets people very, the thrill seekers going.
I think most of the issues in our budget come from prioritization. In a public environment, open and transparent, where'd you spend the money, how are you spending the money, and any project of any size probably takes at least 3 years, I'm just off the top of my head, 2-3 years of just building the political will and working through to start to get it into the capital cycle to even be considered.
That's right. So you have to do a lot of planning on the forefront because you need to know what that figure might be, and you need to adjust for inflation or other dynamics that are constantly changing over a 3-year period in order to, as you build up that political and social capital for the backing of your project. And that's a huge problem that local governments face, especially, in strapping budgetary times, right? When they talk about federal budget, come on, that's a drop a dime, research and development and other types of projects. I heard the other day, and I don't know if you've heard this, what is the figure that they're spending on the I-66 expansion? Has anyone heard that figure?
I'm sure it's in the millions.
No, it's more than that.
3B.
3 billion.
B, yeah, I did do the B.
Oh, you're talking about the actual construction of it.
I think the entire project of expanding the,
Yeah, but
one lane on each side.
A lot of that's they're rebuilding bridges.
Yes, and so bridges
They're
cost
tearing
a lot
bridges
more,
down
yes.
and putting, because I'm right there by Haymarket where
Right.
they took down a bridge to do this. So I mean, I would imagine that's where a lot of that money's coming from.
Probably so, but $3 billion. So now they're looking at the economic impact or an economic analysis of what's the return on investment. So you also, when you're thinking about your budget, you also need to think about that return on investment. How many people think that spending $3 billion to expand 66, one lane on each, west, eastbound, out that far is going to have a positive return on investment?
Absolutely.
It's really hard when you're talking about public infrastructure to put a dollar value on people's quality of life, ease of access. You can try to project, well, this will attract more businesses to,
Right?
you know,
Well-
Fairfax or Arlington or whatever.
That's right. There's too many variables to calculate it accurately, but from what preliminary data suggests, it's going to have a negative dollar for dollar return on investment.
Yeah,
But all that aside, it is going to have a positive impact, yeah.
I mean, this is all, I mean, if you're talking about road construction and what have you, that's all like a big hot button political type thing, because the planning and designing of the roadways in this area, I mean, that was done a long time ago.
That's right.
We had one beltway, there were supposed to be 3 beltways, okay? And anytime someone wants to put a road in or what have you, that's needed, you know, the neighbors come together and they protest, okay, we won't do it. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is, yeah, this is gonna cost a lot of money, but the other things that they were planning on doing, they can't do because of the people, political will, what have you.
That's right.
So, in that respect, if they can do this, no matter what it costs, I would
It's a
say
trade-off.
it's worth it because it has to be done.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. And and even though some economic analysis when you're looking at projects and return on investment, this area is going to, I think annual average growth in population along that corridor is 0.8% on average each year. Now, that seems low to me, but okay, what if there's another economic, boom? Okay, well, we need to account for that potentially. But what if the population just continues to climb and doubles that? Say if it's not 0.8%, say if it's just 1% or even 2%. So then your return on investment goes dramatically up. All right? So it's really hard to understand the societal impacts and do a one-for-one count measure, because you have to look at the qualitative index as well. And that's harder to measure because there's so many variables out there, like quality of life or just road rage in general, I mean, at least this way you have more lanes to get around. But yeah, I'd heard it was $3 billion. And that was 2 days ago. So I don't even know if that's publicly released information, because I was talking to the person who's doing the economic analysis. But are there other big projects?
Does that number also include the land acquisitions?
I believe so.
The
I believe so.
land's already there, they already own the land, because they're doing.
They're doing on the inside, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
So, I
But,
mean-
you just never know.
I mean, people were really concerned about, I know I'm going off topic here, but if they were really concerned about the cost of these projects, I mean, there's so much regulation, bureaucracies, or what have you, that goes into play. Just like the contractors for us, they build in that for road construction, they have to hire cops to do the traffic control, and they
Of
put that
course.
money in there. So that's just one little thing, and of course, they can train and hire people to direct traffic, but they have to hire us. I mean, I think there's something in the code about that too. But anyway, I think costs are inflated for various other things as well. But in all, I mean, I do think, that's what the people want.
That's right.
So it's just like the metro rails that they just opened up. There's not a lot of people using them. I mean, I get to the 4 new metro stops in my district. It's not crowded. It doesn't look like there's a lot of people getting on. Most of the people are getting on and wheeling,
Right.
But that project was very expensive.
Yeah. Well, over time, it'll probably attract more users,
Yeah,
just because
yeah.
it's so set in their mindset and that's why I go back to that muscle memory. It's just memory as part of their daily routine. I mean, people ask me all the time, why don't you stop in Tyson's Corner and jump on the metro? I'm like, well, shit, I'm almost there. There's no point in me
Well, there's no
paying
point.
to park there
There's-
and then
there's-
wait an hour
there is no
when I
parking
could
there.
just make it on in, And parking here is not that expensive.
There's no parking.
Well, even that.
They
See, I
didn't
didn't know.
have
I've never used it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it doesn't make sense for me. I've driven all that way. I'm on the home stretch at that point. I mean, granted, if it's depending on what HOV restrictions kick in, I just need to buy a hybrid, then I'm set, obviously, but that'll be a while. But no, these are important because, projects, and when we talk about in the public sector, they do have to have some type of societal impact. And where does that social and political capital for those projects to come from? Well, it's mostly going to be your citizens, because if there's a project in work or in the pipeline and the people say no, and they can rally and get enough support to stop it, it does happen. Rarely, rarely, but it does happen, right? So I put at the bottom, poor scope definition is probably the contributing factor, just because, like going back to the flying bee, you need to get down as specific as possible in your objectives and tasks, because if you don't, your budget can get out of control, your people can get out of control, communication mechanisms can get out of control. So if you don't have a clear and defined scope, and we talked about scope creep, then that's probably the number one problem leading to all other problems, right? Once that project's been approved and the money's in the banks, so to speak, okay? We're talking about on initiation, not necessarily in the development, the idea development stage. Any questions on that slide? Moving to slide 5. All right, I did include one graphic, oh my goodness. All right, so we're talking about control measures, and that can be a series of different things, whether you're controlling for scope, you're controlling for budget, you're controlling for personnel, or communication. So we'll get into those a little bit more specific. So at the end of the day, this kind of gives you a lead in as to, okay, we're talking about money, we're talking about calendar, I forgot a person. Oh well. Slide 6. Again, just reiterating everything we've already discussed. Project control. Well, first of all, we have to have a defined cost. Very rarely do we have a project that doesn't have a dollar value assigned to it. You may have like when we were talking about construction costs, and sometimes they can go up to 33% more than what the estimate came in at. How many projects do we have in which someone's giving you a certain dollar amount and you have to stay at that or under? Pretty much all the time, right? Construction's different, right? But if I'm getting a project, or if I'm doing anything for the university, like this program, I have to, budget accordingly and very, very carefully, because if I go over it, that's a negative hit to the school. So that money's got to come from somewhere, and they don't really like that. That usually translates into your ass is gone around here if you don't have tenure, which I'm not a tenure-lined individual, but at the same time, most tenure people around here don't do these types of projects. They don't even do research projects. They just write articles and teach classes and show up to the occasional service activity. So when the money is involved, the pressure is greater, right? So if you're working on a big project, or even a small one, depending on what that impact is in the societal good, you can have some major repercussions based on how that budget turns out, right? If you go over, depending on the size, if you go over a little, it may be that they're willing to absorb those costs, those negatives, but not always. I've got a project, for example, right now that ended end of May. I've got a PI and another PI, a co-PI, who have overspent their budget by about $2,000. Okay, that's not that bad, right? And that was before the project closed. Well, and part of the planning process, they didn't include, they have to make this huge technical report and provide it back to the funder about what it is that they did, what are the major findings of their study. They didn't plan in a person to help write, because none of them can write. They didn't plan in someone to copy, edit, and format. So guess who that falls to? Yeah. And then what's worse is this project was closed May 30th. They have until June 30th. I do not have a document on my desk yet to start formatting or editing. So not only are you looking at negative costs, you're also looking at negative consequences of not completing on time, given the fact that that's an external funder. And so that image that's being portrayed from your organization, but not only your organization, your individual members within it, how does that look? Would you go back to them for funding? Well, I'm glad my name's not on the project, because that protects me to some degree, but I'm at the institution and the center in which is, providing the major services for it. So it's a struggle, a tug of war, if you will. So even if you're not directly involved in that project, if in any way your organization or you as an individual are involved, it can still come back on you to a degree. How many people have that happened to, that you haven't been directly involved in a project, but something negative happened and it also caused a negative light shed on you, or you had some type of consequence associated with it? You're doing good.
Every
That happens
day.
all the time.
Yeah, it happens all the time. And you'd be unrealistic for it not to happen, right? So going into a project, understanding that even if you're not working on it, if it's, sometimes stepping up to the plate and making sure things get done, people don't count those as project success measures, and we'll get into that in a minute, because one of the articles did talk about, and we'll again talk about it later, is the definition of project success is different from the definition of the success of project management. They're two different things, right? Just because the project is successful, you can have a complete management nightmare, right? Just because the project fails, you could have done everything right on the management end and it still not work out right, okay? So you have to look at all those things and balance the pieces accordingly. So identify potential risk, all right? Identify contingency, kind of like what I was talking to you about just now, and escalation. And then always identify items not included. Again, going back to external factors. You just don't have all of the unknowns. It's what we call bounded rationality. Have any of you heard of that concept? No? Bounded rationality is mostly a concept that Charles Lindblom in the 60s came up with. And he's a big public administration scholar that focused on decision making, right? When you're planning, when you're making decisions about a project and you're weighing what you're going to use versus all of your alternatives, is there any way possible for you to know all of the alternatives? Usually it's the alternatives you come to mind. Well, in prior literature up until this date, rational decision making decided that, you have a list of all known alternatives. Well, you can't possibly. So your rationality is in fact bounded to what it is you know, or your organization knows and has experienced, or anyone within your team, okay? So sometimes using a consultant, going outside of your organization to ask for ideas, allows you to expand beyond that groupthink dynamic, and that way it opens your mind up to other alternatives, so you're not as bounded, but again, you're always going to be bounded. So when people start talking about decision making, there is no one best way, there is no perfect list of alternatives, everything is bounded, and I'm a big supporter of that. You're selecting the best path or the best measures appropriate to the information you have on hand at that time. If that needs to change, build in that change within your project. Like do an internal evaluation every 6 months if it's a 5-year project, or once a year, Most people only do evaluations on the end of their projects. It's good to have them periodically, depending on the length of it, and also in terms of the budget, the size and the scope. So then that way, if something were to happen, you can change and not be frozen as that change is moving forward, okay? Again, going back to those external constraints or factors that are constantly influencing or putting pressure on you or the organization and trying to get a project completed. So bounded rationality. Any questions on that? Any comments? Anyone disagree? I see groupthink's going to be great today. We're moving on to the next slide. We're on cost control, okay? So in terms of cost control, again, detailed project scope, work package, meaning if you don't have those items up front, it's going to be very hard for you to plan your budget. If you don't know the various objectives, the various tasks associated, you may miss something and it may be a huge chunk of money. Like copy editing, if it's a $100,000 project and you spend over $10,000, that's 10% above your original budget, right? So I'm not saying copy editing costs that much, I'm just giving an absurd example. But you need to think about these things before going in and have someone else take a look, just to make sure, bounce ideas around to make sure that you are putting in cost associated with different parts of your project, not just like I know some people pulling a figure straight out of your hoo-ha, or what we call working backwards in the research world. Say that you get a request for proposals and they say this is the maximum amount you can apply for. This is probably 97% of all researchers that I know. They go for the maximum and then they work backwards. Sometimes they find themselves trapped and can't eventually get the project completed because they didn't actually build the project with the cost in mind associated with each activity. They just made the maximum amount budget. Now that's, in public sector sense, that's fraud. First of all, because what if the project only costs half of what they're charging? Well, that's wasting taxpayer dollars, right? And going back to, you're getting a surplus. Well, the university, yes, we charge our operating expenses. Depending on what entity it is, it may be approved at a 10% rate. It may be approved for a 20% rate with a certain kind of match. It may be approved at the federal rate of 51%. So if I have a $100,000 project that I'm going to work on, and that's my base project line, how much is that project going to be once I submit my proposal?
For Fed,
$202,000, 51% more than what my baseline is, just for operating costs. That seems a little excessive, doesn't it? And the universities around the country very rarely fudge on that. So you have to get a letter from the funding agency saying, no, this is our approved rate. And then the university will usually comply. But that's the federally approved rate, 51% at facilities and administrative fee. That's crazy. So you're starting to see people run more projects in my world through foundations because they don't charge an F&A rate. And then you have more flexibility with how that money is spent. So there's creative ways to do the budget. But back to point at hand, it's better to actually associate the cost associated, plan the cost associated with a particular objective and its subtasks, not just work backwards from, oh, I think I can get this amount of money and I'll just, try and do everything I say I'm going to do. And don't worry, I'm guilty of that too. I've done it. It worked, but it wasn't any chunk of money. It was, because you just don't know some of those unknowns. What you probably, in the R&D world, if you say you're going to do something, it's not like contracting where we can plus up. But if you make the commitment and you don't fulfill your obligation, so if I ask for $200,000 and that's the ceiling and I don't really need that much money to do it, or I just went for the maximum and didn't really think out my objectives and tasks and it cost me more, if I don't complete that, regardless, they can reclaim all $200,000 from me and I still have to do the project. So there's different mechanisms in place. Has that happened to anyone where you had a budget, we're going to try and complete a project, needed more money, or you just had to absorb the costs?
That happens all the time. But
Yeah.
a lot of that comes from, we've got a project going on right now across the street from us on a consolidated homeless services center, whatever you want to call it. They were supposed to have been completed in March. Now they're talking, with any luck, the end of this year. But a lot of it has to do with subs and how things, what they thought was going to happen didn't happen, or ordering equipment that was supposed to be one specification turns out to be something else. So and a lot of that's being controlled not by the prime but by the subcontractor.
Mm-hmm.
There were a lot of complications that resulted of that. But I was thinking, the stuff that you don't think about sometimes, like the big hoorah about the pool in Arlington. They want to build a pool up at North Track.
Really? Okay. I haven't heard
A
about
very
this.
nice pool, an $80 million complex. And some of the costs were over, but what they really failed to understand was, okay, even if they build it, the cost associated with the long-term maintenance, the projections out on that, based upon usages and times and how it done, took tremendous changes into what the overall cost of that project was going to be, beyond just the project itself, which eventually killed the project. For now, I'm sure.
For now. Okay,
I'm
so
sure
they're
they'll come
gonna
back and have to
rework it.
regroup. But yeah, I see this all the time.
Yeah.
With cost overruns. Again, a lot of it's changing markets. I see that a lot of times when we go out and they start doing roads in the county.
Right.
Because now the cost of asphalt, which was here when they started, is now 3 times. It shoots up. It's all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff you never even think about.
No, and what's even more important, those are tangible. You're talking about materials and supplies, like things you can touch. What about in IT? IT is very expensive. Now you can touch the
Yeah.
equipment, but the coding, the software, anything that's custom made on the backside, kind of like my project with Highway Patrol, we're delayed. We had one of the key coders graduate and leave and take a job. We had to train someone, so we're a month and a half behind. And we knew it was going to happen, so we planned for it. But still, that takes time and money, and the IT world is something that's only going to get more and more expensive depending on what your needs are, because it's a hot commodity in cybersecurity, what we were talking about before we got kicked off this morning. it's only gonna become more of a problem. So make sure the unseen items are also considered. All right. Cost status report. So these are some things that you can do along with your evaluation, just making sure you're at, that's why in the reporting form, you always kind of list what your costs are to date, what your remaining costs are, what your costs were this past report period, right? Forecasting. Well, that's a little more difficult, but usually if it's a multi-year project, you usually, and say it's a $500,000 project, how are you going to spend that money over the lifetime of the project? Are you going to spend the majority of it up front? Are you going to taper off? Is there some type of sustainability? Kind of like what you were saying. Once the pool is built, what is the user load going to be like? Is it something that will bring in revenue to kind of pay for enhancements or repairs in the future? Maintenance, basic maintenance.
Right.
So you have to give considerations for those things, especially for projects that may not have a tangible outcome, okay? Like food, I think I was telling you about the Arlington Food Center, okay? They want to know what their impact is on healthcare. Well, you can't really see that. You have to look at the different outcomes and health measures. Is there a reduction in child obesity? Is there a reduction in cardiovascular disease among people of, the majority of their demographic background in which they're serving? So there's a lot of those measures that are good for the public, but you can't really see them, and it's very difficult to measure. And it may be 10, 15 years before you really see any of the real benefits or outcomes of those. So you have to guesstimate, just best guess in terms of what your forecasting really is going to be. That's why economic models are so random and varied. You cannot rely on one economic model from one year to the next. If you're going to do forecasting, it literally has to be from year to year, okay? Change management. We'll talk a little bit about this later, but also going back to what are these unforeseen costs that you're not seeing right now that may potentially skyrocket in the future. And then cash flow forecast. That's more for, I think, construction costs or anything that you need to pay for up front that you may not have on hand in terms of a project. Like in the university world, if we get a grant, some grants will go ahead and pay us half up front and then half when we complete. So that cash flow, we have to have that money on hand to pay for anything that's going on in the interim, once we use up any resources that they provided us on the front end, right? But most projects are cost reimbursable. So the university has to front all money and then submit invoices and then they pay for it, right? Moving to the next slide on team requirements. Oops, was that one off the whole time? Okay, team requirements. All right, we talked about this in interpersonal communication and individual dynamics. Okay, so what are your KSAs needed? What are the real skills you need to get this project done? You need to consider these things before you actually put that your budget together, your plan together. All right, have you identified them? And if you haven't, you don't have to. You can always put to be determined. But for your key project players, you usually need those identified. When are they needed? Where are they needed? Is there any training? A lot of people leave out the training piece, both in their budget as well as their project plan. Okay, they just automatically assume someone's going to be able to come in and do. Now I know in police and fire that's probably not the case because you're constantly going through training and development for very specialized needs. But for others, when I get a grad student, I can't just assume that he or she may know everything that the last one did. I have to work with them. That I need to get them up to speed before I can throw them into helping with any project. Even though they've got the competencies, it's just, do you have the knowledge of the project? Do you have the knowledge of the history? Why did it get started? What's the real need? What are the social and political dynamics that are going on both prior to and currently with the project? And then interpersonal compatibility. That's a difficult one. That's probably the biggest complaint among all students, no matter exec ed, grad school, undergrad. No one likes to do group work. First of all, it's like working with subcontractors, right? You cannot rely on them to get it done. And if they don't submit their piece to you when they're supposed to, what does that do to you? Well, it stresses you out probably, and then you're constantly trying to shuffle other things that are going on in your life, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I believe Jack and I were having this discussion earlier about the World Fire Games and how, homework's not due until 2 weeks, right? And so he was like, oh, because it was going to be pretty tight. Well, yeah, there's a lot of moving parts in anyone's life, not just one project. So how do you, if someone is delayed on getting their piece to you, how does that impact you and everything else? So being able to communicate and be compatible with your teammate members, building that trust, that network with them, so then that way they can keep you abreast of any changes or any delays is a very important thing, because if they don't feel like they can talk to you, they're probably not going to really care to get you that piece. But if there's a piece of loyalty or, respect that you have mutually shared, they're more likely to get it done. Even if it's not perfect, they'll get you something, right? No?
Well, it's just that's, in a lot of situations, that is the consideration that is the hardest to take into account, because you only have so many people, and once you get through the skills and the authority, the knowledge and so forth, you're gonna have what you have.
Right.
And if the division commander doesn't like the fire marshal, they're just gonna have to suck it up. I mean,
That's right.
For us, that's the reality of it. It would be nice to be able to consider that, but we have a limited set
Right.
of people from which to choose.
That's a great comment, because especially when you're talking about some of these paramilitary organizations with very line control hierarchies, you don't get to pick, or you do just have to suck it up. And a lot of times that's the way the world really is. But at the same time, even if you try all your best, people above you or other people could be undoing the goodwill that you've managed to accomplish. So interpersonal compatibility is very difficult. So for me personally, after scope and budget, that would be the third biggest challenge, I would think, in terms of project success or project failure. Do you agree with that? Disagree? Reordering
I think it
of
depends
those?
on the complexity and the size of the project.
That's
So,
true. That's true.
I think, obviously you have a small project, you probably don't have much
As many people.
interpersonal interaction. I would add a bullet up there that on these highly complex and multifaceted type projects,
Mhm.
it's not necessarily interpersonal compatibility, it's
It's just the-
leadership.
Yeah.
And being able to identify the different personalities, being able to work with the different folks is a key part of it. But there's other things, there's motivation,
Mhm. Work ethic.
there's explaining the project, explaining their value. I mean,
Mhm.
there's a,
No, especially, and we're talking about project complexity as part of one of the articles this afternoon, but yes, when you start looking at project complexity, that's when organizational behavior literature really supports or backs up project management, because people don't look at those large projects as organizations, but they can serve in that capacity, because it's just such a huge project. If it's a $10 million project, and it's going to be 5-10 years, that to me almost operates just like a baby organization, period. And so there's a lot more dynamics that come into play rather than some smaller or more manageable projects, because it may be one large project with sub-projects underneath.
see, a lot of the projects that I deal with are not budget-based.
Mm-hmm.
They're large projects, but
Yeah.
they come under my normal duties and responsibilities.
Right.
And so it's not just, a monetary value associated with it.
No, it's associated with you as an employee of that organization.
Sure.
Just like me. I don't get paid based on the different things I do. It's like I have all these different projects and I have to get them all done regardless of time. It works out sometimes it doesn't. So, but I'm not, unless I have a project that has an amount attached to that. But for me, most of my days are like that. Teaching, granted they could pay someone to teach my class, but I'm just absorbed into the university. So because they don't have to pay someone to teach the classes that I do, it's just you can assign a dollar value to it, but they don't. So,
I think, like the example you gave before with the fire marshal, what have you, I think those of us in public safety, regardless who you are, if you're thrown together and you have to complete a project, I think we're all professional, we can accomplish the task.
mhm,
I think where you come into problems is like what Jervis is doing now with this response police shooting program, where he's dealing with citizens
okay.
who are totally unaware of culture or procedures or whatever. That's when things get difficult. So I guess that's the piece where you throw in there about capabilities
Mhm.
and whatnot.
No, these are very important things because not all projects have a dollar value, like have a budget assigned to them. Your Spanish program, did it have, refresh my memory, it had a dollar value assigned on the programmatic side,
Yeah,
but not
but it
on
was-
your side, right?
No, it was, there's a dollar amount because we had to pay the teachers.
The teachers, but not for you.
We get, no, the officers learned on duty, so it was.
That's right, okay, see? So you have to consider those things as well, is like, this program brings in money, but that doesn't come to me, it just goes back into operating it altogether, because anyone we bring in from the outside, we have to pay. And then, we just basic management in terms of trying to get the university to do what they're supposed to do, which takes forever, but yeah. Okay, any other comments on that slide, on team requirements? All right, client-customer relations. So going back to what Jay said earlier this morning about stakeholder analysis and that being a part of the project scoping efforts. Well, when you're talking about a client or a customer or stakeholder, I should have wrote stakeholder up there, but they're not all just stakeholders. Sometimes they really are clients or customers or citizens. You need to develop a communication mechanism. How are you going to articulate what's going on in the project, what the benefits are, how should they have some kind of input back into the project. Most of the time when we talk about public service, what's the venue in which citizens get to interject? Some kind of open forum or at city council meetings or county board of supervisors. What are some other mechanisms that are traditionally used here in Northern Virginia? Media, maybe websites where they can, leave feedback. Any of you, what's the most recent, say, in-person, face-to-face stakeholder communication session have you had?
It'd be a citizen advisory meeting where we have groups of citizens that we meet with once a month, basically.
Okay, that's great, yeah. That's very important, especially given the world of public safety right now. Having that one-to-one, that one-on-one kind of time, especially building social capital with your community, given, everything that's been going on, that's great.
There's numerous citizen groups that we deal with. and work
Yes.
with on a regular basis.
I'm thinking more on the mass scale. But you have different stakeholder groups, and I get that. Because tell me about some of them. I'm still learning
We
everything.
have the Tyson Security Group that we have to meet with
Okay,
once a month.
once a month, okay.
Okay, and then there's the Tyson's Mall, their management.
You were telling me about
that we
the
have to meet all
station that's in Tyson's Mall and how you're looking to move it out, right?
the time. Okay, yeah, we have officers assigned to that.
Right, but you're wanting them to pay for it, or
Yeah,
you're,
So
that's right,
she's
that's
paying for
right.
that. So
Right.
I'm just saying that, on a regular basis, we meet with
Yeah.
different groups.
And I'm sure you do public service announcements of all sorts, not just media briefings, right? So in a lot of ways, that is communication. What are your, apart from some of these these smaller stakeholder group meetings, do you ever participate in like the city council or government?
Well, there's a lot.
Arlington doesn't have a city apart from Paul's Church, I get that. Or
Right, but
your corporate
Arlington
you're
does a
not-
couple things, you
township.
have planning commission,
Mhm.
there's a number of different commissions that are set up by the county government
Okay,
that citizens are participate in
right,
to give feedback to the board.
right.
There's a number of those that are set up by the county manager's office. And I wouldn't be surprised if the county executive's office in Fairfax to get feedback to the
Right.
board. And then you have the people that come to the actual board meetings and the public
That's where I was
notices.
going, yes,
But
okay.
you also have, but at the same time, on any major project, they have some, I can't remember what they call it, they're saying that the county specifically sets out for feedback via the web. It's an open forum on that. So
That's
they
what-
look at a
yes.
number of different
Avenues.
avenues to bring information in.
See, in this, where I'm from, they have all of those things, but since it's a smaller population base and, a lot of these are by invite only or, even though people probably show up, but it's those open forums where you're specifically addressing a particular project or a particular topic where people, come in or come to the monthly board meeting in order to express other concerns that may not be necessarily handled by some of these more targeted outlets.
But just to be clear though, if you go to a board meeting, you're not talking.
They don't have-
There is a very limited period of time that you can come up, and you can come at the very beginning of the board meeting and bring up subjects. On the Saturday board meeting, they bring in people that are gonna testify to whatever it is they're talking about, that have been prearranged, but it's not an open forum for every
Really?
citizen to start talking about.
So that's good,
If
they
it gets-
kind of do their new business
Right,
on
so
the
if
front
it-
and then they plan for
Right,
it
so
later.
what
Okay.
happens is you have a consent agenda, that, if it gets passed on
Mm-hmm.
the consent agenda, fine, but now somebody says, I have a problem with X. That gets moved over to the Tuesday agenda, then you can come in at that point in time and you can talk to
Right.
that topic, limited to 3 minutes a pop. I mean, sometimes they
Right.
still go on forever, but limited to 3 minutes a pop, that's when they get into the specifics of, but you know what's interesting, I rarely see, it's once in a blue moon I see engagement from citizens, and it's usually about some very specific thing. A-Town, there's a bar in
Yeah,
Arlington.
I know, it's right down
Yeah.
the street.
That one has people that hate it, and it has a group that loves it. And when they redid their permit for another cycle of the live use permit, I bet you there was 300 people in that boardroom that were complaining about it or supporting it. But then the vast majority of the time, it's about the same time about you guys, but it's about the same 25 people that show up at the board meetings. They give their 2 cents
All right.
about the county government, because the vast majority of the 230,000 people in this county are
Don't
like,
care.
whatever.
That's right, they're apathetic. Well, that's exactly how I'm used to it operating, is it's very issue driven. So that's,
There you go, it's
I was
issue
trying to
driven.
get y'all there, but it's very issue driven. But I didn't realize that about A-Town because, I mean, I would think Carpool would have more of a hate following than A-Town because it's just a bar.
Doesn't make the same noise.
How do you know about all these bars?
Yeah, she's in the right demographic.
Well, once HOV kicks in, you gotta go somewhere around here. Yeah, no. Depends on whoever has a last minute meeting and where they want to meet. I really liked Event Tide, but they shut it down, and then Liberty Tavern's great, Northside Social is great. I'm learning. How am I supposed to become a member of the Northern Virginia community if I don't try some of these places? I think that was a good statement on my part, but okay. So ensure timely participation. That's why I was bringing up that is, okay, so you're saying at the board meeting, you have the consent agenda. That's correct. Then you're gonna move on and, if you come up beforehand and that, eventually your item's gonna get put on the next Tuesday, whatever the cycle is, right? That kind of deters participation. And that's why when we're talking about project management, ensure timely participation and that it's open. It's not just about your schedule, it's also about your stakeholders' schedule as well, okay? Depending on if that's a board or if that's, the citizens, what have you, you need to be respective also of their time. And then don't just send one person. Usually you need to send a few people because not one person understands the comprehensive nature of a project depending on the size and the complexity. So it doesn't say, you don't have to send the entire project team. Just include the project team or at least a few members.
But you're really talking about two different things right now. There is a public debate part. There's a public
Right.
process to talk about whether or not a project's going to move forward.
Right.
That's all it's really saying. Is this project going to move forward or not? Is the county going to fund it? Is it a priority?
On that part,
Yes.
yes.
Once it's past that, then all that other part really becomes, other than communications with the immediate stakeholders,
Right.
like the homeless shelter, the immediate stakeholders, the apartment complexes around there and a few others, The rest of the public forum is out of
It's
the
done.
picture, because now you're
Right.
getting into the actual project.
That's right, that's right.
So when you get, there's a entirely different set of parameters that run that.
Yes, and you need to communicate appropriately with those different groups as you move through the life cycle of the project. So yes, talking about the citizens on the front end when we're talking about public projects,
Yeah.
and then more of the individualized, the more concentrated stakeholder groups as the project moves forward. So if it's a project with kids, I know Mike has mentioned this a few times, Mike Shamblin, about how his daughter is autistic, and so working with law enforcement and and being able for them to understand when there is a call coming in that an individual may be autistic, and that's why it's kind of chaotic. But being sensitive to those issues as you move forward as a law enforcement officer. So education, the officers may be the larger project goal, or and then moving into the rest of the community in terms of educating them on, well, when you call the law enforcement and if someone's autistic, you probably need to let the law enforcement officers know that up front. I didn't know if y'all knew that. No?
I thought Mike was our, no.
Mike was your what?
No, I just-
Oh, got it. Yeah, well, he said he has those talks all the time, so I didn't think it was confidential information.
It's
So
not surprising, I mean, there's.
it's becoming more I mean,
We had-
the autistic population is
We
growing.
received a lot of training on that, actually.
Yeah.
And I was gonna say, this past week, we had 3 calls dealing with autistic children.
Mhm. And that you
suffering
handle
from
it differently, I imagine, just because it's just,
It's just an awareness piece. You understand that it could be something other than
that's right.
an emotionally disturbed
right.
person. It could be
But I
it
think
could be a
we-
number of different things. So.
That's right, that's
Well,
right.
It's
you
just
always
an
think
awareness
that-
piece.
You understand, we deal with people in their worst times.
I believe that.
And whether they're autistic or having a mental breakdown or what have you, I don't think anything is really surprising when you're dealing with any particular citizen.
No, that's a good idea. But also educating the public at large about some of these things, like if they see a son and a mother, maybe the son is autistic and there's a little shuffling back and forth, and this person calls in and says, hey, I'm seeing a son beat up his mother. First thing the law enforcement officer is going to do is they're going to take control of the situation, right?
In all situations.
In
yes.
all situations. And that's what you're trained to do, and that's what you should be doing. Then, if that person didn't let you know that this person's autistic, maybe, the way you move forward beyond that might be different. Depending on if you're not properly trained as a law enforcement officer. I'm not saying that in this room that you all aren't. I'm saying in Podunk, Mississippi, that's probably the case. Trust me. They're just probably not trained at all. No, really. So I was just using that as an example in terms of, when we're talking about communication pieces. So let's move on. Develop trust and confidence, and then build social capital. So any other questions? I think we covered that slide pretty well because we chased the rabbit a lot. All right, so we're on the next slide, Rosalind, on key control philosophies. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Jump in whenever.
Okay, I will.
Okay. All right, key control philosophies. So, define and manage risk or opportunities. So, a lot of people do SWOT analysis. Did Bonnie cover SWOT analysis?
No, but
Melissa.
Melissa did great. I knew it was part of, I just couldn't remember who. Integrate scope and estimated cost into schedule. Make informed decisions. So these are kind of going back over the highlights of everything we've just talked through. Again, what did we say about decisions that are informed and a list of alternatives? There can never be a perfect list because of why? Your rationality is,
Founded.
thank you. Anticipate deviations, changes. We talked about that a little bit. Adopt the end product approach. Okay, so again, so what? What is it we're really trying to accomplish here at the end of this project? When all is said and done, what do we expect the outcome or the output to be, even if it can't be measured immediately once it's completed, right? Because some of these projects have a shelf life of 10, 15, 20 years, maybe indefinitely, but you need to be able to measure that accordingly. And then plan ahead from phase to phase. I talked about this in terms of budget. I talked about this in terms of evaluation. and as it relates to change management, just a little. We'll talk a little more about change in it later on. But you need to be constantly evaluating as you move through the life cycle of your project, but also once that project's underway, making sure, depending on the length of the project and the complexity, that it's being evaluated accordingly. I know that someone else has already covered that, but I'm just building it in as part of, an activity as part of your project management plan. Okay? Any questions though on project evaluation? I think she did mostly program evaluation policy analysis, but program, project kind of go hand in hand. But any questions on that? Great. Next slide, project quality. All right. So again, define the scope and review periodically what those changes might be. Limit formal change procedure and require justification. If you're going to change something within your project, whether it's a major outcome, a goal, or not so much an objective, maybe your objective might slightly change, but if your goals are changing because of political, social climate that's occurring that you just didn't foresee, like an economic boom, or if there's a terrorist attack. We talked about this last week some. You can't plan for all of the unknowns, but if it does happen and your project gets delayed or postponed, or maybe you have to sit it on the shelf for a number of years and you need to pick up another project, you need to be able to justify that. And I'm not saying that it has to be an in-depth justification. It's just a matter of what the project is you're working on. So some of these more social good type projects, if something more significant happens and you're working on a project that's more of a passion for you or for a few of your colleagues, and that may not have money attached to it, that sometimes those projects kind of tend to go to the side until whatever crisis situation you're in kind of resolves itself, right? I think we talked about some of the projects that were being worked on in this area prior to 9/11, and then 9/11 happened, and well, you just had to set them aside, and I'm sure that took quite a few years to get back on track. And at that point, the scope of that project you were working on also likely changed, just because. Have you ever heard of punctuated equilibrium theory? All right. When we're talking about changes in projects or in society that cause a delay in our project, let me erase this. All right. Punctuated equilibrium theory actually comes out of evolutionary biology. Imagine that. For the purposes of project management and societal changes and how that impacts some of our more social good projects, for short, we call it PET, right? I'll write it out. Guess it's still. So, punctuated equilibrium theory. All right. A lot of people use this. I'm surprised Bonnie didn't cover this. Punctuated equilibrium theory, when we talk about policy. Pick a policy for me, any national policy.
No child left behind.
No child left behind. Okay. Hot topic, right? When was No Child Left Behind? I'm trying to get, this is my attempt to get you all to talk.
That was Bush that did it.
What year did it kind of surface? Well, we know it's the early 2000s, right? So we'll put early 2000s over here. And it's 2015 here, right? I'm going to erase that because I need my line to go a little bit further. We'll say this is 1990 right here. How's that? This may not be a good example. What precipitated No Child Left Behind other than Bush? Was there a precipitating factor apart from him? There wasn't like some major, I mean, we had shitty test scores, but there wasn't There wasn't like a national incident, right?
Not a single.
And we use 9/11 all the time, so can I change?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry. We'll say this is 1980. This is 1990. This is 2000. And this is 2010. How's that? All right. In 1980, we had a standard series of national environmental policies, right? So we'll just say NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, for whatever short reason, because there's a whole cadre of those, right? 1989, what happens?
What are we talking about?
Chernobyl?
Get there. Huh?
Chernobyl?
No, in the U.S. We'll talk about U.S. policy. What happened in Alaska in 1989?
All about these.
Exxon Valdez, okay? So we'll just put, that's my V, and we'll call that the oil spill, right? And it happened in March of 1989. What happened in 1990? So you've got this baseline right here, okay? Of National Environmental Policy Acts. We'll put a little S. You know, they're creeping along, no major incidences here in the U.S., you know, just a lot of people getting together and doing good policy, right? 1989, you have the Exxon Valdez incident. 1990, you have the Oil Pollution Act, right? Your policy making in regards to something very specific takes off, right? Because you have a single act that can be attributed to a specific event, almost like the reorganization of DHS in the aftermath of 9/11. There was a direct contributing factor to that event, right? So for Exxon Valdez oil spill, you have the Oil Pollution Act in direct response to that. So now you come up here and you have a new level of policy making. Okay, so you have a baseline, you have an event, you come to a new level. We call that a stasis. That new level, when it flatlines, is now called a stasis. It's a change in the activity level from your old to your new. 2010, what happens?
Golf?
So you have the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. What happens in policymaking?
Probably goes up.
No
You would think it would, but it didn't. It was such a dramatic change right here that there was a punctuation in the policy making. That's why we call it punctuated equilibrium theory. This is your equilibrium, this is your equilibrium. You're changing it from one level to the next, and that's your new level. It didn't go back down, it didn't go up with the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, it stayed the same, for the most part. There were some little changes, mostly in regulations, but nothing in terms of national policy where people were just like, oh my God. That had already done it. This doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. So when we're talking about project management, anything that was going on and related to oil spill research or just environmental, it all took a back shelf, right? Because now this has happened and new projects around this particular area, whether in the local vicinity or around the larger topic, you know, of oil, environmental hazards, even disasters, emergency management, that sort of thing. You've got this new line, so we won't get into why it didn't change, that was part of my dissertation, but just know that it didn't change again. You usually only see it change one time within a certain policy stream, for the most part. 2, if you're lucky. What are some others? So that way, when we're talking about things that happen in our social and policy world that may have impacts on our projects, it's good to, punctuated equilibrium theory is not directly tied to projects, but in understanding the constraints or limitations or things that can happen to your project, it's good to know for that reference. But what are some other ones? We talked about oil spill, we talked about 9/11, what's another one? That's why No Child Left Behind is different, because it was more presidential driven. But you could make it, you could say that almost like, if you want to look at it from a presidential standpoint, Bush has No Child Left Behind, Obama has Obamacare. You do see those initiatives, it's just different.
Well, are there any
It's not societal driven.
significant changes after Katrina with
Oh my gosh,
emergency
yes.
management, how that all went?
No, you're absolutely right. Hurricane Katrina is a huge one. What are some others? No? None?
Well, you got the drug wars.
Drug wars, but who started the war on drugs? I mean, the campaign. Was that societal driven or was that politically driven? And if so, by who?
I think it was probably more politically driven, probably.
Nancy Reagan. That was her big baby. It just got buried beneath because she was the first lady, but yeah, that was her big thing.
I could
So-
see that you
Nixon
could, I
had the
could
war on
see,
crime, huh?
right.
Mm-hmm.
That was Nixon.
Mm-hmm. So you have both your societal policy pieces that are really driving, because what was so horrific about the oil spill is what captured the hearts of all the Americans during the Exxon Valdez oil spill.
The oil-covered ducklings.
And now you still see that commercial with Dawn today. That's why it was so powerful, and that's why you saw such a quick change. Like No Child Left Behind is still, when it's presidential or politically driven, at that executive level, people hated No Child Left Behind, they still do. There's still mixed feelings about Obamacare. People in the war on drugs, did we really do the job we were supposed to? I mean, and then, now people are, different localities or jurisdictions are legalizing marijuana. So you see this difference in between what the executive level and then the society wants. And so it's this, it's like flipping two magnets over that have the same polar end. It's just not going to work. But any other examples?
Civil rights, in the 1960s.
Huge.
Big change.
Yes, the Voting Rights Act, yeah, that.
But I guess you could
that's
apply that to like industrial stuff too. I was thinking as
Yeah.
you talked, we had the Industrial Revolution at the turn of the century in 1900s, early 1900s. So the railroads, the Trans-Pacific Railroads, things must have had a significant change in how we do business.
And what happens, now when we're talking about this, remember we're talking about, this can happen at the community level, but more importantly, punctuated equilibrium theory is applied mostly to national policy. But what we're talking about is when this happens, you are literally changing the social fabric of society, period. Okay, so the country's identity as a whole, okay? Big oil, this is, people are already anti-oil and stuff, but this is right when it starts taking off is after Exxon Valdez. I'm not saying I'm an anti-oil person, I'm saying I look at it from a societal standpoint. But if that were to happen, given the area that you're in and the relevance, again, back to project management, if there was another terrorist attack here or some kind of nuclear incident, what do you think is going to happen? Well, you're going to have punctuation, and then any project you're working on, most likely that's not directly in line with what's going on at the time, sometimes will get pushed away.
So 9/11 was not the punctuation for terror attacks or whatever?
No, it was.
It was. So-
it can happen again.
so
If anything's
I'm
going to
wondering-
happen,
So cyber attacks, that's something new.
that would be new, and
That's a
it's
little
like
different.
an extension. Yeah,
Exactly. That changed some stuff.
yeah.
But I was
so-
wondering, if you say, let's say we have another event. 9/11 changed a lot.
Yeah,
It changed a lot of many things.
that's right.
If we have another attack here, though, I don't know if you're going to see that much of a change. What you're going to see is probably more attention to all those changes that came before.
That's right.
So, but I don't see that same
That's right.
fundamental shift because we're
That's why I'm
already in it.
saying, usually a punctuation only occurs one time in a certain policy stream of that magnitude.
Right.
And from there, you have little splinters, different policy streams that kind of break off into their own, and you might see little spikes. But on a whole framework, we're talking about terrorism in general, which could encompass a lot. Or in this case, the oil spill, it's such a magnitude of change that, it's hard to manage what's going on, because at that point, anything can happen. But that's more of a, just keep that in mind when you're thinking about project management and what kind of impacts things like that. What is it? How did the 9/11 Commission report put it? An event of national significance. Okay, so an event of national significance. And another thing that report charged was that this country had a lack of imagination, that these things can happen. So when you're thinking about projects, should be in the back far corner of your mind, but it needs to be there, and a lot of people don't think about it, period. Especially people, when we're talking about rural parts of the country, they never think that things like this can happen to them, and it possibly could, because you never know. Where is one of the huge biohazard laboratories in the country?
Biohazard laboratory?
research laboratories. Most people think of CDC in Atlanta or NIH up here in Maryland.
North
Wait,
Carolina, isn't it?
there's some stuff in North Carolina, Manhattan, Kansas.
They're all over.
Yeah, they're all over. And you never know where they're at because they're deemed as
There must be a national
critical,
security.
yeah, critical infrastructure or something. Yeah, they're very hard to find. But if something happens to that, it does have, to those areas, it could potentially have ramifications for projects or, projects. It just does. Now, granted, we're here in Northern Virginia, so we do other things. Okay, moving on. Okay, limit, we talked about that. Complete more upfront before defining cost and scheduling. That makes sense, especially those things you can get done. And then obtain operability and maintainability input to design. Okay, we're moving on to quality improvement. Any comments, Rosalind?
No.
Okay. Okay, quality improvement. All right, we talked about, what?
I'm gonna go pee.
Oh,
I'll be
great,
back.
yes, please take a break. Sorry, I'll take a
I'm
picture
going
of the
pee
board.
with you.
Hey, let's go. Get a sex bathroom. Down the hall.
Like, y'all have to remind me, I'll just get going. I should probably check my email and make sure
Yeah, there you
the
go.
hell's not.
The world
all
hasn't fallen around us.
Huh?
Make sure the world hasn't fallen around us.
I hope not. Okay, we talked about PET. OPA, res stuff. That's good. Lunch. We'll be easier.
Do you know if that's accurate? Because it's not working on my computer.
It's not, I can log in on my credentials.
You can?
Mm-hmm.
God bless you.
Yeah, if y'all can't get in, just let me know. I'll log you in as me.
Sorry about that, Tanya, that probably wasn't supposed to be.
My secretary.
No, yeah, look,
I like it.
I get
Straightforward.
I appreciate it. You're not, look, someone texted me and said, how's it going? And I was like, well, I can't meet probably until lunch. And he goes, why are you texting me right now?
Then I think about the
You know,
headquarters and they'll give me
bathroom break.
14 $1
Oh, is
bills.
that Tanya's though? Because if there's not a bathroom, I tend to go behind the bush. That was their reference to me, and I said, no, I didn't have to go this time. Okay, so it says it's, oh, that's why. Let's go here.
We had
No
a,
problem.
end of the budget.
You're welcome.
process,
Anyone else need it?
Spending spree.
You need Wi-Fi?
No, thank you
Does
so
no one
much.
else need Wi-Fi?
I'm good.
Okay. All right. No problem, anytime. Of course, of course. Yeah, not a problem at all. Here, I thought y'all were taking notes and you're just working on your quiz.
That's done.
Well, you know, as you
taking
hit the
notes.
salient points, just kind of write them down on the quiz. So you-
And it's kind of sad sometimes, the fact that, you know, you're all grown adults, so even giving you assignments is crazy, but it's part of what we have to do. That's why they're kind of, some are intense, some aren't. It's just, from module to module, they may be more exam-like, or they may be more activity-oriented, or they may be more kind of like the synopsis, you know, practical. Yeah. And there's no single model of CPM around the country, so it's really kind of a fluid thing in terms of how you want to create it. So it's just, you know, and since this is the inaugural cohort, we're just kind of going through, and so far so good.
There you go. No worries.
At the end of the day.
I did wonder about that. How are we doing?
Good,
We're
good.
6 months in.
Well, we begin the accreditation process next week. So they won't let us even get in touch with, I mean, I'm in touch with them, but they won't even begin their side of it. But they've seen everything. I've been to all the meetings. It's not a problem. It's just they won't do it until you get to that 6-month marker. So we're there. That's why everything's so standardized, and there's more creativity and depending on how the instructor wants to lead from module to module. Some programs, they do levels where they just give you do, say, 4 topics, and then they give you an exam. That's like 25, 50 questions, multiple choice, matching, short answer, whatever. But they'll do 4 modules and then give you something, and they do nothing really interactive in those. It's pure lecture style, right, where there's not a lot of discussion going on. Others do it more like this, where it's module to module and you're building a grade in, you know, that's why we don't have A, B, C, or D. It's more of a high pass, pass, or did you even kind of show up kind of thing. So really, they're in it to, the national consortium's in it to make money too, so.
I don't
you know,
doubt it.
They don't really care all that much.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
I mean, they do, don't get me wrong, and some of those meetings are horrible.
All meetings are horrible. What are you talking
It's not all meetings.
about? Pretty much.
No. If
Pretty much.
alcohol's involved, that meeting might be fine.
Alcohol.
Is that a meeting?
Mhm.
Well, you guys are just like, I'm seeing things every other day, either from Rosler, next community meeting, this
See,
outreach.
I
I'm like, wow, this guy's.
should have
like
a lot of
other
it.
stuff inside of
So
them.
when we're in uniform, we can't.
So
I know,
I'm
not
thinking
yet,
maybe I'll level
yeah.
off for it
Next
at some
Thursday, I
point.
have to go to
Well,
a CAC picnic.
I think we were,
You know, if
We're
they're-
standing outside. It's
we had one
hot.
canceled last night. We were
And
supposed to
you
go
can
for
have
us.
toddy.
They're doing an
I think you have a picnic out
abbreviated
there.
Citizen Police
Yeah, especially if
Academy
you're gonna have
at
a
a
barbecue
fellowship
there.
church,
Yeah.
Heritage
Coleslaw.
Fellowship Church up in
I mean,
Ruston. So
it's just-
they're not
it's
putting on the
horrible.
full academy, they're putting
Our
on
CAC people normally,
parts of the lecture here and there to kind of give them an exposure piece for those people who choose to show up
Yeah,
over several weeks
I mean, I have
to
their
learn.
wine.
Because what we're learning
I think
with
some of
the
I
commission,
I
the review
don't
commission
bog
or
myself
whatever,
down in my mind
is that the
whenever
more they
I'm,
learn about us,
like a co-author,
the happier
working
they
on
are
these together,
with their
it's
police
easier for me
department.
to have a glass
Yeah,
of
and
wine
And their
in
thoughts,
my hand
and
because then I'm
they
not
stop
overthinking
judging
it.
us
It just
based on
comes
the
out a little
national
easier.
news, what's in the
Now, if
national
I'm in
press.
pure
The more they learn about us,
project mode,
they realize that those issues that
I've
are
got
going
people
on
flying around
elsewhere
everywhere, and
are not
I don't
happening
need
here.
anyone
I
around me
agree
to
100%.
get
We've
done.
been doing it for a long time. It's constant outreach.
I'm actually working on an article.
The only thing
with
that
some- with a
Doug,
Frederick County,
Doug did stop
Maryland
the
officer.
Citizens Police Academy, and I'm
On,
instituting that because I think
Small
it's,
businesses as vulnerable
it's just
populations
worth its
and
weight in
aftermath
gold.
of
It cost me a
disasters.
couple of bucks, but it's
Meaning
you know,
No,
the
no,
district
fact
teams,
that
the people that
their
go out to all the
businesses
civic
get- are not
associations
have
and constantly
the
have that
cash flow they
input,
had in
there's
order
constant stream of
to
information,
sustain,
but
depending on how
I still
long
think the
you're
Citizens
out.
Academy, for us, we're nowhere as big as you, but they're
Doesn't treat them as a
really,
vulnerable population. You traditionally treat minorities,
they build a good
children,
advocacy for it.
elderly,
you don't have to like everything you do, but at least have some sense of why you
those
do what
types
you
of
do.
individuals,
Exactly.
prisoners, that, you know.
And we can't get
but
enough
not small
advocates.
businesses.
I've been doing
And there
them,
are
I've been
special
doing a lot
federal
more
grants out there that
face-to-face outreach.
are specific to vulnerable populations.
Because,
and
one,
also
because I'm
small
new, but
businesses.
I did a lot of it when I
Why
was
there's a
a
disconnect
deputy chief
because
in
it can
operations. I go to a fair number of the civic
community if
meetings.
those
I don't go to
small
all of
businesses
them, I
don't come back,
could.
especially in
Right.
local
But I try to
areas,
hit
like rural
each,
areas.
all of them at
Because
least
that's their livelihood.
1 or 2 times a year, so it isn't just the captain up there. They can ask what's going on with the agency.
I may have typed it so fast. I was really careful this time.
My whole community, all they give a shit about is traffic, parking, speeders, that's it.
Try real.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
You know, scope of things. Like they're all up in arms again about this week about
Sounds
the
good.
boat trolley.
Fine. I think we've got everybody. Okay,
I'm
we're
like,
good.
okay, we've talked about this 1,000 times, but we'll continue on.
I saw something recently on the news
Okay,
about
we'll go ahead and
the
get back started in just a second.
locking people up for
She's
dip
back as well.
and swearing in public.
Well,
Drunk
swearing in
and
public
swearing
when I
in
got him
public.
going, yeah. Which is where I was telling him earlier. The
No.
reality is, out of the
Deepwater
664 arrests, 4 of them
It
were
wasn't
for
as
person use, and none of them were
homogeneous as a
generated by the
society,
police. They were
like
civilians
Valdez,
that asked for speak to
Cordova,
an
Alaska
officer.
was.
Okay.
The rest
You
were
know,
dibs.
it was a very
And I
specific
think you put it in
population there,
perspective, so
very
we have almost
localized.
60,000
Everyone knew
crazy
everyone.
fucking
Well,
drunks
in
in
the Gulf
Arlington,
Coast,
and the Clarendon every weekend.
The oil release
In a
was
population of
widespread in
230,000,
parts of
so
Texas, all the way to
600 out
parts
of
of
that?
Florida, right?
It's-
Plus the waters are
But you know,
warmer, so
It's just nuts.
oil dissipates in
It is.
water
So what
better
killed me
when
is
it's
the New York
warmer.
Post picked that up as a
And
story. I said,
there's a
really?
mix between
Really?
the
This is
oil
what you got to
industry
do?
professionals and those who fish. And a lot of people who work for the oil industry also fish to enhance, their quality of life or to supplement their income. So you didn't see as much of a public outcry in terms of Deepwater Horizon as you did in the Exxon Valdez case. So that's why you didn't see another big shift in the Oil Pollution Act. Because people down there are big oil.
Well, there was another side of that.
Mhm.
British Petroleum did a hell of a lot more.
They got on the
Immediately.
front end.
Immediately got on the front
They did.
end and invested
They
a
did.
tremendous amount of resources
They did.
and time and energy into that, where Exxon Valdez was like, kiss my ass.
That's right.
there-
And look
there's
at
a
how long
big
the
difference.
litigation took on Exxon Valdez. I mean,
Yep.
25 years, and they were still kind of tied up in courts. So then also, in response to that, BP dumped a lot of money into media. They dumped a lot into the recovery fund. They dumped
And
a
into the
lot
community.
into research. And
That's
so, and the impacts, okay, there were some impacts, but
Absolutely.
I mean, I fish down there all the time. And I actually got to go out on the boat with the BP contractors, the Coast Guard, and, look for the oil. So being able to see the response efforts, it was definitely more transparent, but it was bad, but it wasn't, it just, you didn't see the oil covered animals, and the fish are in the water, so you can't really see them. And so there were so many more circumstances that prevented it, or even helped it from becoming on the scale of Exxon Valdez. So, but I looked at social and political impacts more than policy, but I touched on it, and it was really interesting because Hurricane Katrina and Deepwater Horizon both impacted the same communities. Like, ground zero for Hurricane Katrina was Plaquemines Parish. Ground zero for Deepwater Horizon was Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. That is a very ground zero for Great Mississippi River flood of 1927 was Plaquemines Parish. They keep getting the worst of the worst. So, and they're very resilient. So it's just interesting. Anyways, okay, moving on. So we're on quality improvement slide, okay? Great. So we talked about it a little bit before the break in terms of developing, having that piece of quality management plan early in the project. And quality management just means a system of checks and balances, making sure that you're on target, making sure that you're following all of your project management tools that we started developing last week, making sure your evaluation piece is where it needs to be, okay? So most people get into the project and they forget about the actual management piece of it. And again, we'll talk about the difference between a project and project management and how one can be a success and the other can be a failure, but they're not mutually exclusive, okay? Just because one's a failure doesn't mean the other's gonna automatically be a failure, or vice versa, a success. Include representatives from all affected organizational units. I talked about this a little bit earlier in terms of just because you're on a project or you're not on a project, if you're not on a project and it looks like it's going to be a failure, you know, that can also have impact or challenges for you in the future, or your organization as a whole, and how that does, you know, how that impacts your image and accountability. Initiate the project effectively through kickoff and alignment meetings. I mean, come on, these are standard practices, to have a project kickoff meeting, to have some periodic retreat, depending on how long the project is, you know, where you get together, get off site, so then that way you can kind of break out of your turtle shell. And then you always have a project closeout meeting, right? How many of you do the meetings in between? You do them at good. Meetings in between, right? Those are good.
It depends on the size and stuff.
Depends on the size. I mean, you may meet once weekly informally, but, you know, having a formal, okay, where are we at? Where you're, you know, off-site, that's the key. Having some of these meetings off-site, so that way you're not constantly feeling like it's work. You're also in those meetings doing what? Building trust, social capital among your teammates, right? Your project teammates. Then you also want to review performance and measure success. Where do you exactly stand? Are you still on target to meet those goals and those objectives and respective tasks? Because if one's delayed, it's going to make all delayed. So you need to be able to track that as part of the milestone schedule, or the AKA the Gantt chart, right? You have something? I always feel like you have something to say.
I always have something to say.
Okay,
There you go.
that's what a woman would
It's
say.
funny because probably in Fairfax County Police Department, Jervis and I are probably the most polite people there, right?
All right, next slide. So when we're trying to, you know, do a visual capture of what quality management or total TQM, total quality management, looks like, we've got this image, okay? You've seen this in multiple variations in the last last session, but you've got quality assurance up at the top, because that's exactly what your ultimate goal is you want a quality product or a quality end result, right?